Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. Or, of course, if you're watching on our growing YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here to talk Carolina football, man. I mean, we posted a podcast for those that didn't see last week, kind of going over Carolina's first week of fall camp, giving some of our insight and observations from how that's gone so far. And now we're here for part two of that kind of podcast series, if you will. 12 practices into the season. Fall camp technically ended on Tuesday, and classes have started today on Wednesday as well. So Carolina's kind of officially transitioning, out of that fall camp routine and diving into a little bit more game prep moving forward, which we'll go ahead and talk about here in a few minutes. Now, AJ, you've been covering UNC football more in depth. You've been on all the press conferences, doing some podcasts with us as well, talking to a ton of players and coaches, had the opportunity to talk to a few assistants as well. So before we dive in kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about today with some of these topics, what have kind of been your overall thoughts and impressions from, the first 12 or 13 days of Carolina's fall camp so far?
Well, I'm going to tell you the same thing I did last week when you asked me the question after 1 week, and a little plug here. Also, Sunday night, we had a private Zoom with a bunch of THI subscribers. It's a perk of being on the site. You join, become a member. We will actually do some private stuff. We talk about things, a little off the record stuff for everybody, but this is an easy thing. Mm-hmm. They're loaded. I told them that. I said on the podcast last week, I say it now. There is talent everywhere. Mm-hmm. That really jumped out. You were at spring practices and saw it, Jacob. Mm-hmm. And it's even more so when I was at practice here at the opening of fall camp, where it's just everywhere you look, there are guys, there are dudes everywhere. The only thing that would be a concern is that a lot of them are young. So when you're asking a handful of young guys to step up and be big time contributors, that's pretty doable. And you can overcome if one or two don't. But if you're asking a lot of them to do it, that becomes a little bit trickier because the law of averages are pretty simple. Only so many young guys are really ready to play extended roles at this level. Mm-hmm. I happen to think that they're going to end up on the side of the positive there. A lot of these young kids are going to step up and help. And part of it is they're not going to be asked to do a ton. They're going to have niche roles, whatever their strengths are, like on the defensive line or whatever. If they're going to use raw and power at linebacker, for example, what situation would they put them in? It's going to be a situational type thing. So they couldn't play guys situationally a couple of years ago because they didn't have that many. Mm-hmm. Not at the level they have now. Now they can. I said a week ago, they've reached a point where they can absorb some 4-star guys not panning out. Well, that's where they are. The last week simply reinforces that. And also, I think what's really cool is the competition everywhere in practice is making these guys better. We spoke to Justin Olson, sophomore wide receiver, after Tuesday's practice. And he was asked, about, was it ever difficult when you weren't getting on the field and you're trying to buy your time? Because everyone's talking about him now, Jacob. Yeah. You ask all the players who's stepping up, Justin Olson. And, he did travel last year. And I looked down the field from the press box, Tallahassee, here's 83 running around. Mm-hmm. You're Boston College, look down from the press box. Oh, Justin Olson's in the game. I take a little note. Justin Olson's in the game. Mm-hmm. He didn't play a lot, but he got in. Mm-hmm. And he said it was frustrating in some respects because he's behind De'Ami Brown. Yeah, he's got a Daz Newsome out there. So it's kind of hard to crack it when you got those guys running routes, right? But what it did was it made him compete with those guys. And then he's competing with the guys that are there now. And he's really starting to see what he's all about. If you go into a situation where you played 4 years of varsity soccer, you understand what I'm talking about. If there's just a core and that's it, how's practice going to make them that much better? Yeah. When you have more guys that are pushing and they're interchangeable. And let's face it, if it's Emery Simmons 1 week or Chaffee Brown the next week, that's because they're constantly pushing each other. They're both really, really good. I don't think that would be a situation where two guys are playing because they don't really have anybody. It's because they're constantly pushing each other forward. And that's what I got from what Justin Olson said. That's what I got from what Stacey Searles said Tuesday about the offensive line, about the competition there. Guys like Jonathan Adorno and Caden Baker rising up to meet the other ones instead of, well, they're the next guy, so we got to put him in the game anyway. We got to have him in the rotation anyway. He's got to travel with us. In fact, one of the defensive players this past week we've talked to so many kids, like 25, I can't remember who it was. It may have been Jeremiah Gimmel, said the coaches are going to have a tough time figuring out who travels, because I believe you can only dress 72 on the road. 72 could travel. So who travels? That means there's some kids that can help, some kids that other P5 programs would put on the field in a heartbeat might not even make the trips.
Yeah, it's great.
That's where this program is, and that has not been learned in the last week. It's simply been reinforced in the last week, Jacob. And that's a long way of saying they're really talented, they're really deep.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things. We talked about it before. Not going to repeat myself too much, but we took away from spring ball, and it's really no surprise. But we're being in front of these kids a little bit more, getting to talk to them, getting to talk to the coaches a little bit more. This is just a group that, like you said, is absolutely loaded. I want to switch the focus a little bit to the first scrimmage that Carolina had last Saturday, and then we can kind of move forward from there.
And they have one this Saturday too.
They have one this Saturday.
And the scrimmages aren't just isolated things. They can actually connect. So this Saturday scrimmage will be a little bit different than last week's, which makes last week still relevant because they're building toward this week. So go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Carolina scrimmage on Saturdays. They had one last Saturday, which was their first one of fall camp. I thought there was a few interesting talking points to take away from there. And I'm sure you'll agree. We talked to Mac Brown, I guess it was Sunday, so the day after the scrimmage. And first thing I kind of want to start with, because I think it was probably the biggest thing to come out of it. We had talked to Larry Porter last week as well, and he had talked about how there was not really a ton of separation at that backup running back spot, but he expected during the scrimmage to see a little bit of separation there. And Matt came out on Sunday and basically said that, if we had to play a game tomorrow, Caleb Hood's my number 2 guy behind Ty Chandler. And, I got the chance to see Caleb right before he enrolled at Carolina at a high school camp, and was super impressed with him. We saw him in fall camp. There was definitely some learning curves there, but a guy that physically looks the part, a guy that even during some of the small little kind of scrimmages, for lack of a better word, that we saw during the spring, made some nice plays and did some nice things. And I thought for me that was one of the biggest kind of takeaways from the scrimmage was that separation, and the fact that it was him instead of a guy like DJ Jones or a guy like British Brooks or Josh Henderson that have been around the program a little bit longer. So speak on that, AJ, and maybe some more of your takeaways from what you've kind of heard and learned from the first scrimmage and some of the takeaways from that.
Well, first of all, with respect to Caleb Hood, mad props to Miss King.
Yeah, she's all over it, man.
She knows her stuff, guys. She telling me for a year and a half, Andrew, Caleb Hood's best athlete in the state. He's going to surprise people. And sure enough, he is. And by the way, the other thing, Bryson Nesbitt, Mac was gushing about Bryson Nesbitt, tight end who just enrolled. He wasn't there for spring. And Dina said this very similar type things about him. She actually said, he's got a lot of Eric Ebron in him. And Mac was talking about how he's spread out. He's not your traditional tight end. He could play wide. I mean, we might see him run wide receiver type stuff this year, assuming he gets into a rotation. There's a lot to crack there with Garrett Walston and Kamara Morales, but Bryson Nesbitt's great athlete. Dad was a big time player, so he's another name that came out of it. But Caleb Hood, I'm not surprised because I put so much stock into what Dina says. Yeah, and I trust her so much. And with Caleb as a quarterback, he wasn't your traditional pocket type guy. It was more your high school kid who runs a lot, throws a lot. Laterally, he's much quicker than he appears. If you just focus on the lower half of his body, which is huge, you might think, well, that guy's not going to be that fast. But he is. He's quick. He's plenty fast. But he's got great vision. And vision makes him faster because he makes decisive, good cuts. He knows how to read the blocker. He knows how to get through holes. This is stuff that people saw in high school. This is what Dina saw. But he was graded as a quarterback, as a dual threat quarterback. And he's not a quarterback at that level, at the college level. He is for the high school level. So I'm not surprised that he's number 2. I'm a little surprised it was this quick. I also think it might be a mechanism to push DJ Jones because DJ has a history getting banged up a little bit. And I think they want him to kind of get his game 100% in gear. So we'll see where he ends up when they go to Blacksburg, because that's what will really tell what the rotation is. But I'm not surprised that Caleb's one of the guys. You and I both did a podcast back in April after a practice before the spring game. And we both said Caleb's going to be in the rotation. You can see it. And just think about how much more advanced he is now. still working on the pass protection stuff, but he's a very smart kid. He's picking all those things up. So I'm not surprised that he's in the rotation at all.
No, definitely not. I mean, I think we all knew he was going to play, like you mentioned. The fact that he's a second back right now might be a little bit unexpected. But like you said, with what Dina said, from what I've seen from him in person, not only in spring ball, but even going back to before he even got here, I mean, a guy that's just super impressive for his age. So, yeah, was there any other, things from that scrimmage in particular that kind of –
the scrimmage and also just the last week, one of the things that I'm taking away from the last week, and I'm doing a thing that we're going to run Wednesday, 5 things we learned from the second week of fall camp. Mm-hmm. One of those things is Cedric Gray's name came up a lot. Yeah. Now, this time a week ago, what did I tell you when we did this podcast? I said, I said, there's an area of concern. It's depth at inside linebacker, because if Asante or Gemmel go down, you're talking Gray, who played 6 snaps at linebacker last year, played some special teams, but only 6 snaps on defense. Oh, wow. Or you're talking freshman Ra Dilworth and Power Eccles. That's not the kind of depth that you want at that position. They're going to want more. Gabe Stevens, of course, is injured right now, true freshman who hasn't done anything really yet. He's not going to be a factor. But Cedric Gray's name came up a lot. And Jay Bateman actually told us that, he's working, and Tommy Thigpen told us he's working both at the Mike and the Will. And the Mike is what Jeremiah Gemmel plays. That's the super smart guy linebacker spot where you got to get everybody lined up. You make a lot of the calls. You're the voice there in the defense. You got the safety talking, and you got the Mike talking. And we had Cedric on Tuesday. First time we've had him. Very sharp young man. He was talking about the challenges going back and forth, Mike to Will, interchangeably without coming off the field. That's what he's working on right now. But the fact that they're trusting him with those things, the fact that Jeremiah Gemmel has taken him under his wing and really schooling him, what he's doing now is Cedric Gray is matching his smarts to football smarts to the impressive attributes he has physically. And he is a sideline-to-sideline guy. He's the biggest of the linebackers. He's a sideline-to-sideline guy. And he's faster. Based on talking to people we have, he's faster than I thought he was. And he played some wide receiver in high school, so you can know he could go get it. But we're thinking of him in terms of linebacker. So I actually think they're in better shape at inside linebacker now than I did a week ago, because everything we're hearing about Cedric. And let me qualify by this, Jacob. And I've talked to you about, sometimes you hear a lot of plaudits in fall camp and in August. If you cover Vanderbilt right now, I'm sure guys are gushing about teammates.
Yeah.
This program, the culture of this program is such that the players may gush about one another, but it's the coaches. These coaches, I think, temper a lot of that. I think they're pretty clairvoyant about a lot of this stuff, or transparent about a lot of this stuff, and we're getting that from them. So I don't think the coaches are going to say Cedric Gray has made this progress in this area, this area, and this area, if he hasn't actually made that progress. So I think they're better at inside linebacker than I thought they were. I think they're as good and have as much depth and talent at defensive line as we thought that they were. No changes in the second week there. I think they're better in the secondary because I think they're better at corner than we thought they were. Tony Grimes is thinking, Dre Bly told us on Monday, he wants Tony to meet what are the expectations of a 5-star kid. He said, you have a responsibility not to satisfy what other people said about him, but you're a 5-star kid because God gave you a gift and you have a responsibility to that gift. And he's talking to him about that. He would know because he had the gift too. It still does. He probably still go out and cover a little bit. So I think Grimes is going to be a more mature, better version of himself this year than I would have thought maybe a week ago. And I had pretty high expectations for him a week ago. So there are a lot of parts of this team, I think, that are moving forward in the right direction. The second week of spring practice absolutely confirmed that in some areas. And I really like the Cedric Gray part because that was an area of concern. And I don't think it's as much an area of concern right now. If he's thrown into the game in the second quarter because something happens with Asante or Gemmel, I think Carolina's going to be okay for a while with Cedric Gray in that spot.
Yeah, and that's obviously a big positive because we've seen it in the past with Chaz and Gemmel. This is not from what we've seen in the past with Bateman and with this coaching staff. They did not like to rotate those two guys. So I think, you expect Gemmel and Asante to play a majority of the snaps regardless, especially Jeremiah Gemmel. He's a guy that just really never seems to come out of the game. But when you can have
He's a pro. He's a pro, so they don't want him to. But Jeremiah we had Jeremiah several days ago, and I think I asked him about embracing the idea, which is sort of the mantra this year, do more while playing less, produce more in fewer snaps, because they have so many guys. Before they were just trying to make sure their guys could stay on the field for 80 snaps in a game. Now they want you to play a little bit less, but produce the same amount. And for Jeremiah, that would be the toughest because he's played, 1,800 snaps the last 2 years, 1,700 snaps. I mean, he's barely come off the field. But he said he is embracing it because if he sits a couple of series, a series in the first quarter, series in the second quarter, series in the third quarter, maybe that amounts to 15 to 18 snaps, or 15 snaps, let's say. Well, that's 15 snaps conserved when he gets into the fourth quarter. Exactly. It's going to be 15 snaps more he can give you before reaching some of the tired points he was against A&M and Notre Dame last year. And those are the two games that Mac keeps referencing when he talks about the defense wearing down. It's not just at the line of scrimmage. It's in the edges, it's in the backfield, and it's in the middle there at linebacker. So I think Jeremiah will embrace that because he wants to be 100% himself in the fourth quarter. Like I said before, against A&M, if the linebacker or defensive tackle closes that gap a little bit and forces the running back to bounce out a little bit, or a linebacker's there and forces a little bit of a bounce out, maybe that 45-yard touchdown run or whatever it was doesn't occur. Maybe it's a 10-yard run. Maybe that's the difference in the game. That's what they're trying to gear toward. And if a guy like Jeremiah is embracing that, everyone else in that team is going to embrace it because his word is law. He is to the defense what Sam Howell is to the offense.
100%. He's definitely the quarterback on that side of the ball.
No doubt about it.
I want to ask you about two more things before we wrap this up. I want to ask you about the backup quarterback position. And the reason I want to ask you about it is because we've talked to Mac on Sunday. And I thought another big takeaway or one of the things at least that I took away from it was what he said about that position. And he basically says something along the lines of, we haven't seen the separation there we'd like, and I think he even said, I'm going to even talk to Coach Longo over the next, soon and for over the next couple of weeks to see if he can do different things to get that separation there. So from what you've heard from the coaches, from what you've heard from the players and throughout the last couple of weeks, how do you see that kind of backup QB position between Jacoby Criswell and Drake May kind of shaping out? And what's your understanding of it right now?
Well, the players haven't been asked too much about it, and understandably so. When the coaches have talked about it, whether it's Longo, whether it's Mac or whoever, I asked Longo specifically about Drake, and he gives me an answer about both guys.
Yeah, that's how they do it.
If you ask Mac a question about Jacoby or Drake, he's going to give you the answer about both guys. The first scrimmage was all about personnel. Mm-hmm. It was all about depth chart. Okay, these two guys are going into this scrimmage are kind of neck and neck. Who's going to outperform each other? They're going to watch the film twice Saturday, once Sunday morning before practice, before he talked to us. He's watched it since then as well. And they're trying to find out who has the advantage. Who do you give the edge to? So nothing was determined at quarterback. The second scrimmage that they have coming up, it's going to be about depth chart, but it's going to be a little bit more about scheme. Like they weren't really worried about certain scheme type things or putting too much in or even fine tuning stuff for the scrimmage. They knew they were going to be a little bit raw in some areas and make some mistakes. Strictly about personnel. This one's going to be a personnel, a little bit more scheme because it's going to be their last truly live action that they have before they actually go play Virginia Tech. They may do some live segments afterward, but next Tuesday they're getting into game preparation, even though it's a week early. So Saturday is going to be the deciding factor, in my opinion, about who the backup quarterback is. I believe that they probably have an idea already who that is, but you want the process to play out. You want to be fair to both guys. You want to let that process play out. There's no need to rush into naming your backup just yet. They're still going to have plenty of time if they do that, let's say Sunday. But Sunday will be the second opportunity, the second scrimmage. And you want to make sure you make that determination after Saturday. I think I said Sunday, after Saturday, because they're not going to have that full scrimmage again to gain that, to determine that separation. Mm-hmm. So I think they'll know who the backup is for sure after Saturday. Maybe Mac will announce that on Sunday. It's about the same time 2 years ago when he announced Sam as the starting quarterback. It was a Sunday. We actually went and met him in the press conference room. It wasn't an after practice kind of thing. And he told us right out of the gate, well, Sam, how's the start quarterback? Surprise for people. I think something along those lines will probably happen this weekend. And I think the lean is probably the newer kid, Drake May. It has nothing to do with a legacy or anything like that. I just think that that's probably what the lean is. But I could be wrong. We'll find out eventually who it is. I think that it's a good problem to have because they're both extremely talented kids.
Yeah.
Jacoby Criswell at times in the spring looked phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And Drake, when I saw him in the first practice, very impressive.
Yeah.
He could really throw. It looked like a video game throwing the ball sometimes, like a computer generated type stuff. So he's got an extremely high upside. So that'll be determined. I think most of the position battles, the ones that there are, will be determined. I think a lot of the depth chart stuff will be a roving, fluid thing throughout the year. And it's a good problem to have because when Day Hollins is your fourth cornerback, you're in really good shape. You know what I mean? When you got Gio Biggers, who might not be starting at safety, that's a really good position to be. If Bryson Nesbitt, as talented he is, if he's pushing John Koppenhaver, you're in really good shape at tight end. You got 10 offensive linemen. If Caden Baker's pushing, you're in really good shape because the other guys aren't dropping back. Those guys are going up. That goes back to the competitive stuff I was talking about earlier. I just think that they're getting better across the board right now. They've had a very productive first 12 days, very limited on the injury front. Ethan West is out for the year again. Yep. He got hurt. He played the first 2 games last year that was out for the season. So otherwise, they're pretty healthy. They're getting some guys back. Brian Anderson's practicing some now. Storm Duck is back practicing. Bo's doing some things. By the time they roll on to Blacksburg, unless they have injuries in the scrimmage this week, they're going to be a pretty healthy football team. They're going to have their full complement of guys at the staff's disposal. And it'll be really, really interesting as we sit up there in the press box and figure out all these rotations that are going on. That's one of the funnest parts about covering a team in the first game is who goes in when, who do they go in for, how much do they play, is there a third guy in that spot? On the defensive line, is there a fourth guy in that spot? All that stuff's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
Definitely. And real quick before we wrap it up, I want you mentioned Storm Duck. That was the last thing I wanted to just ask you about real quick, because I think there has been some confusion from the fans and from what I've kind of seen on Twitter and social media a little bit.
There's a lot of confusion about a lot of things.
Yeah, about exactly what his status is. So he's a guy that is back practicing now for the Tar Heels, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that's a huge positive because even thinking about it, I mean, we were even talking about it last week when his status on the podcast, when his status was still a little bit unknown about when he was going to come back and whatnot. And we're sitting here like, okay, well, they've got Kyler McMichael and Tony Grimes, so I think they're going to be all right. You got guys like Day Hollins, Obi Igbona behind them. And I think that just goes to really solidify what we're saying about just how talented this team is. Because you asked me 2 years ago if a guy like Storm Duck goes down, and you're looking back there like, that's a huge loss. Now we're talking about a guy like Storm Duck going, potentially not being available. Obviously, he's back now, but a week ago we're talking about that. And you're sitting there like, well, I think they'll be all right regardless. So I think that really speaks to the depth.
Remember the spring game a couple years ago? Storm had a pick 6, I believe it was.
Man. Yeah.
I mean, spring games are what they are. Guy that pick 6, you may never see him again in the fall, right? But what Storm did is he allowed them to move Trey Morrison to nickel.
Yep.
From corner. Because Trey started at corner his first year. They allowed him to move to nickel. And, Trey's played everywhere, all over the place. And I think what's interesting now is that, yeah, Storm was out. And this goes back to what I was saying before about absorbing the loss as a 4-star guy. Storm was a 3 when he came in. Clearly should have been a 4. He's played like a 4 in college, maybe even a 5 in some respects because he's such a good cover man. Dre told us the other day, when they had Storm out there healthy last year, he locked down that side of the field. That's a pretty hefty thing for a guy like Dre Bly to say about something.
Best corner in the ACC, I think Dre said.
He's called the best corner in the ACC. So you're still in really good shape with McMichael, whom Bateman said last week can be elite. That's a quote. And you've got Tony Grimes. We all know what his ceiling is. It's Dre Bly-ish, maybe even higher. And then you've got a guy like Day Hollins who would start for a lot of people, who's played some good football for Carolina. And oh, by the way, Obi Igbuna is an older guy, smart guy who's, Tallahassee looked down the field and Obi Igbuna played 15 snaps. He's a 5th guy. A lot of teams would love to have him as a starter. So they've got a lot of answers there. And that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier. But if Storm is fully healthy, 100%, a full go, I would think that he would start up in Blacksburg. If not, he'll play starter snaps at the very least You know, McMichael can play both corner spots. He could play 20 snaps for one guy, 20 for the other guy. And then suddenly he's got 40 snaps in a game and they're all fresh in the fourth quarter. Find a way to get Hollins on the field, put McMichael on special teams. I mean, they got dudes, man. I've said it a lot and I'll keep saying it. They have options, which a coaching staff loves, and they have dudes, which a coaching staff loves, and they're everywhere. And they're really good at corner. They could be elite at corner this year as a group. They could be the best corner spot in the ACC. And when you've got corners that are great, and I don't use the word great very often, but great from a college perspective, man, does that ever free up what you can do defensively. Then when you've got fresh defensive linemen who have elevated the group's performance level by a couple of notches, which is possible, and just think of what else Jay Bateman can do with the unique way he likes to approach things defensively. And then you got an NFL guy in the middle of that defense in Gebel, a potential NFL guy in Asante, and you got a couple of potential NFL guys in the back of that defense. The potential for the defense is significant. They still have a long way to go to prove that they are what people think they can be, but there's a very, very high ceiling. And I think it's going to be a 12-week climb for that group. I think what you see September 3rd in Blacksburg isn't exactly what you're going to see the day after Thanksgiving when they go to Carter Finley. I think they're going to progressively get better.
Definitely. They got dudes, man. I like that saying. I'm going to have to trademark that one.
They got dudes. That could be a slogan. Someone should make a T-shirt.
I'm telling you, man.
Give me 25% of the sales, and we'll call it.
That's a win-win right there, man. That's all you're asking. 25%.
They got dudes. Carolina blue with white. They got dudes.
I love it. If anybody's interested, DM us on Twitter. We'll make that.
Or they could have a slogan. The coaches can wear shirts. We got dudes.
Yeah, I love it, man. I think we started something. You have to ask Mac about that.
Just give me 25%. I'll give you a comp subscription to the site.
I love it, man. It's a win-win for everybody.
High dollar value there, right?
Hey, if you're interested, DM us on Twitter. We'll make it happen. But I think it's a good place to wrap this one up, AJ. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones here with kind of our part 2 of our fall camp report as the Tar Heels officially kind of move out of fall camp. Classes start today on Wednesday. So, yeah, not far from the season now, man. It's creeping up slowly and steadily.
2 weeks.
Yep, season opener in Blacksburg, only about 2 weeks away. So exciting times if you're a Carolina fan, and if you're, exciting times if you're a journalist as well, because nothing better than actually covering a game. So
yes, fall camp's over.
Exactly, man. You got through that grind. You've made it through that. On to the next one, as they say. But as always, guys, you know the drill. Like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well, so you know that every time we upload. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.